Well, let's bring in Mouin Rabbani. He's the co-editor of Jazeera. That's an independent online magazine produced by the Arab Studies Institute. He joins us via Skype from The Hague. Mouin, good to have you back on the programme. So, look, we've seen this huge surge in intercommunal violence in these mixed Jewish Arab-Israeli towns. How worrying is this latest development? Because it's pretty much unprecedented at this level, isn't it?
At this level and at this scope and duration, it certainly is unprecedented. I think it needs to be seen in the context of two factors. The first one is almost 75 years of systematic dispossession and discrimination and racism by the state against the Palestinians in Israel. The second, more near-term factor is that in recent years, the defense of the Haram al-Sharif and the Al-Aqsa Mosque has fallen increasingly upon Palestinian citizens of Israel, given that West Bank and Gaza Strip Palestinians have not been able to go there. And so when this Sheikh Jarrah Al-Aqsa issue exploded in recent weeks, Palestinians within Israel were very much involved. And now you've had the extremist Jewish groups inside Israel beginning, what almost looks like a pogrom of sorts. And of course, these aren't just far-right gangs. These are people whose leaders are in the government, are in the parliament, are in the security forces, are in the command of the police, and so on.
Yeah, and Mouin, the problem now, of course, is once this intercommunal violence has been unleashed, it's very difficult to put the genie back in the bottle, isn't it? Because, as you say, the Israeli government's passively acquiescent towards Israeli Jews at the expense of the Palestinians.
Very much so. And I think what you have here is a government which, can make statements that this is bad and has to stop. But precisely because of its constituency, these are its most loyal voters. It's not going to be able to do very much to stop them. I mean, you have a situation where Death to the Arabs has, for all intents and purposes, become the Israeli national anthem. This is not going to be that easy to put an end to, because you have a government that's basically constitutively incapable of putting a stop to this. And I'm afraid it could go on longer and get very much worse.
Yeah, and if you put this within the context of the Israeli state itself, Mouin, you have these formal designations of Arab towns, Jewish towns, mixed cities. It all begins to sound and look a little bit like apartheid designations in the old South Africa, doesn't it?
Yeah, very much so, or the American South before the Civil Rights Movement. I mean, people often don't realize that Israel, even though, all people, or most of them at least, are citizens, it does stratify them according to national origin, ethnicity, and so on. And it's a situation where one group is very much privileged and dominating the other group. And again, this is not just far-right Israeli gangs trying to lord it over Palestinians. These are, for all intents and purposes, the agents of a very active state. And increasingly, human rights organizations are explicitly characterizing this as apartheid for a very good reason.
Mouin, just a final thought to you. I mean, the level of this intercommunal violence has clearly caught the Israeli Prime Minister by surprise. So has this opened up yet another unwanted battle line for the Israeli government? And how will this play into the ongoing broader conflict that we're seeing now with Hamas in Gaza and the unrest in Jerusalem?
Well, I think that's a very good point, because on the one hand, Netanyahu is trying to present himself as kind of the guardian of Israel's stability. And when you have rockets falling on Tel Aviv and mayhem throughout the country, it doesn't very much help him to burnish that image. But one thing that I think is important here is that his rivals are now attempting to establish a broad-based coalition to depose him. And the success of such a coalition depends on the passive or active support of at least one of the Arab parties in the Israeli parliament. And I suspect that at some level, Netanyahu is hoping that this growing polarization within Israeli society will make it more difficult for his rivals to agree a broad coalition that would put an end to his political career.
Mouin Rabbani, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for talking to Al Jazeera. Thanks, Mouin.
Thank you, Darren.